Fantastic. Right, well, welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for this webinar on what white leaders can do to diversify the workplace. I'm Rebecca Torr. I'm a Publishing Development Manager at Emerald Publishing, and my colleague Danielle Ormshaw, who is desperately trying to join us at the moment, she is our inclusion lead. And we're delighted to host this webinar as part of our Black History Month in the UK. And our marketing manager, Doug Medland, who you can see now on the screen, will also be on hand to moderate questions in the chat and help us with our polls. So in this session, we're honoured to be joined by Garrett OBE, an award-winning career coach, leadership trainer, speaker and author, who will speak to us on the important subject of diversity in the workplace and the practical steps white leaders can take to foster diversity in their workplaces. Jenny works with individuals and organisations to achieve career and life-changing results, focusing on skills around gender balance, leadership, inclusion and self-improvement. She's passionate about empowering working women and advancing diversity and inclusion in the workplace, and furthers change through her leadership training programmes, coaching and talks. She is the author of Rocking Your Role, which focuses on empowering female breadwinners. And most recently, Jenny worked with Emerald to publish her new book, Equality versus Equity, which examines the concept of racial equity, provides case studies of lived experiences, and offers practical tips to help the reader move the dial on inclusion. So delighted to welcome you, Jenny, and I'm really excited to get stuck into this subject. It's been brilliant. We've obviously been working with you on the book, so it was a natural sort of progression really to have this webinar, looking at some of the insights from your book and also, you know, some of the other things that you're doing. And obviously you've got such a background and you're so active in the community and making such a difference. So a few housekeeping rules before we get started. The webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be sent out to all attendees and anyone that wasn't able to attend today. And there's quite a few that I know said that they couldn't make it, but they will be listening to the recording. That will be sent out to you. So whatever email you registered with, the recording should go to you within the next 24 hours. The session should run for about an hour, and we would love to hear from you. So please feel free to post your questions as we go along, post it in the chat, and we would take as many as we can of them at the end. If we end up, we've got quite a few questions and we've got so many subjects and interesting things to cover. So if we don't get to them today, we will be following up with you afterwards. So your questions will be answered. So we also have 3 polls, which I mentioned, sort of, we're going to be running some polls. We've got 3 polls. And we really, you know, it'd be great if you can take part. It's great to get an idea of who we have in the session and also sort of what your needs are really in this session, because Jenny will be speaking to that. So that's where we're going to begin. So we're going to kick off with our first poll, and it's just what's your role, so we just know who's with us really today. So Doug, if you could launch the poll, that would be fab, please. So I hope it's working. Hopefully it's fairly straightforward in terms of how you participate. Hopefully that will work. So the different options we have leadership and development professional, diversity and inclusion professional, human resources professional, manager, or you may be in another role. So hopefully that will work. Doug, any ideas? If not, we can come back to it. It doesn't look like we probably maybe not take too much time.
Can you hear me, Rebecca?
Yes. Yeah. Is it working, or you haven't?
Sorry about that. Yeah, it just seems to be a bit slow on the uptake. I'll try launching that poll now and see if that works.
Fantastic. Thank you. Because obviously this is aimed at leaders, but obviously we can all, you know, be part of the solution. So it's quite useful. Obviously, if you're in a leadership position, then you've got that influence, haven't you? And it does make it look, you've got a road in essentially when you're a leader, but I mean, we're all responsible for making a difference. So wherever we're at in our career path.
That doesn't seem to be loading up, Rebecca. I'm really sorry. So maybe
Okay.
just carry on.
Never mind. Maybe we'll come back to it at the end. If not, we'll leave the poll through a bit. The other poll was really just to gauge where everyone's at in their terms of their conversations around EDI, equity, diversity and inclusion. So we can come back to that. Hopefully it will work later on. But anyway, welcome, Jenny. Thank you for joining us today. And it would be great if you can sort of give us a little bit of background, maybe touching on how you got started and why the subject of diversity in the workplace is close to your heart.
Yeah, really interesting to sometimes find out where was the little kernel or that started all of this journey. I think probably the start is my parents. My mum and dad came from the Caribbean when they were in their teenage years. Their parents wanted to start a better life in the UK. You know, that was a starting point for me, for them being a minoritized group in a country that sort of called for us initially, and then they brought their families along. I went into the world of work, started off in retail, and then found my place in marketing. Really loved my marketing roles that I had. And the final role I had was in a business school. And it was there that I learned about leadership development and coaching. Fell in love with coaching, completed a coaching program and went out on my own. I initially resisted doing work with women and those from ethnically diverse backgrounds for obvious reasons, really. It was sort of, I don't want to be put in a box just because of my own ethnicity and gender. But when I wrote my first book, Rocking Your Role, which was a guide to success for female breadwinners, I started going into organizations and providing talks to women leaders. And when I'd look out, it wasn't just that there weren't enough women in leadership roles. I really noticed there wasn't enough ethnic diversity in those roles as well, and thought I need to do something for women and create women's leadership programs, but I also need to do something to increase the representation and the underestimation of people from ethnically diverse backgrounds, or the global majority, as I call them in my book, in senior roles in the UK. So that's a very quick whistle-stop tour of my journey to where I am. I think at the heart of it, all of my work is about empowering people to reach their full potential. And I think when we think about underrepresented groups, we often find that those are people who haven't been empowered to reach their full potential. And when they're not empowered to reach their full potential, it's not just them who suffers, our organizations suffer as well, because there's quite a lot of research out there now which tells us that the more diversity there is, the more creative, agile, and competitive organizations can be. And so this isn't just a nice to have, it's an imperative in today's workplace.
Oh, thank you, Jenny. No, I think that's what is absolutely wonderful about speaking to you, is it's authentic. You know, you've gone through these experiences yourself, and obviously the world is changing, and companies are trying to do a lot more. But we're still quite at the beginning, aren't we? So to just have someone like yourself that has got those insights and can give us a helping hand to get on the right path, I mean, it's invaluable. So it's, yeah, really excited to hear some of those hints and tips later on. So before we get on to the main conversation, I think it would be quite useful just to sort of frame what we're talking about today, to talk about some of the common misconceptions around equity that we should address. So maybe you can sort of talk about what stands out to you the most.
Yes, yeah. So, you know, the book is around equality versus equity, and I think everyone understands what equality means. Equality is about creating equal inputs, really, making sure that everyone gets the same, and that's what we've been trying to achieve for many years. I think what we've found is that actually that doesn't deliver equal outcomes. So if one person's at a disadvantage and one person isn't, and you give them both the same thing, what you find is you're just reinforcing the status quo. And I think this is a challenging concept for everyone, because we want to be fair, particularly in the workplace. We want to give everyone the same opportunity, but actually that same opportunity doesn't create the same outcomes. And so this idea of equity is taking a very personal approach to understanding what people need, understanding the structures that might disadvantage them, and dismantling those structures and putting things in place to ensure that people can have an equal outcomes in the end. I think the misconception is, by doing that, we're giving people a hand up, that we're not going to be a meritocracy anymore. You know, everyone's got their position on merit. So if we start thinking, well, some people can have a little bit more than someone else, aren't we then creating unfairness? I think that I really challenge that. I can give you an example. Someone on one of my courses, who was a white man, described the fact that when he went into the world of work, his dad gave his CV to a few people, and then one of those people invited him in. He had to be great in the interview, but then he got his first opportunity into the world of work. Now, if other people don't have the parent who's able to give their CV into other colleagues or other friends who are in great positions in order to get that opportunity in, then they are immediately at a disadvantage. And although that person wouldn't say, you know, I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth and I've had all the opportunities in the world, when you start to recognize the systems and structures that are in place to help you at least get a foot into the door in the first place, then you realize that we're living in a society that isn't equitable, that actually it isn't just on merit, it is on the fact that sometimes someone will give you an opportunity, someone will mention your name in the right space, someone will know someone who knows someone. And so, you know, one of the misconceptions is that we live in a meritocracy already and that this will dismantle it. The fact is that's not true. There are lots of ways in which people get opportunities that are not fair. And there are so many different biases that exist, from affinity bias to actually body size bias and pretty bias, that mean that actually people don't always get their foot in the door, let alone outright racism. And so I think one of the misconceptions is that actually we live in a meritocracy, that works, why would we do anything different? We don't. And we do need to do things differently. And I think the other misconception is that people play a race card. I've heard this mentioned previously, that people use their race to get opportunities. It takes quite a lot of bravery to talk about race in the workplace, particularly if you're employed in that place of work. I think you put yourself out there to be vulnerable, to be a target, to be dismissed, in fact, which is why people often don't talk about race at all. They're worried about what the consequences of that will be. So anyone who does talk about race and ethnicity in the workplace, who talks about inequity or inequality that they see or experience, is not doing that because they have this wonderful card that they can play that's going to give them an advantage. In fact, what they're doing is putting themselves in a very vulnerable position because it's really important to them. So for me, we're thinking about equity. You know, the important things is, for me, three things that are a misconception are that treating everyone the same creates inequity of outcomes. It does not. Secondly, people can play a race card. This card doesn't exist, sadly. And that third point I was making, which is actually by giving people different opportunities, different treatment, that we are devaluing the meritocracy that exists. I don't think that meritocracy exists at all. So I'd say those are three misconceptions.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's such an eye-opener, isn't it? Because I mean, we're all quite familiar with equality, diversity, and inclusion, like equality, but actually equity and how different that is, and how you've explained it. It just makes so much sense. But it's not something you wouldn't think of necessarily in that way unless it had been explained to you. I think that I think it is, obviously it's a lot trickier, isn't it, for organisations when they tackle the equity part rather than the equality, because it's so much more involved. You know, all the different, because I mean, so many companies have adopted all these different sort of policies and roles, and you know, so steps have been taken, but it's just tricky. I think not everyone knows the path to take, and maybe there are different ways of doing this. But what would you say is the current state of the UK workforce in terms of equity?
Yeah,
I mean, how
I think
did we get here, and how far have we got to go?
Yeah, I think what you just said is a really important point, which is that it's quite involved and it can feel overwhelming to people, and they can and I do want to acknowledge that in this country we have really started on the road in a really great way, and the challenge is to sustain momentum. And I say that because I work with organisations in the US, I work with organisations in Europe and organisations in the UK. And because of their history, the US has been doing a lot for a long time when it comes to race and ethnicity, and actually the UK, I would say, has, you know, is open to having the conversation and doing something, whereas some countries in Europe won't even discuss this. They, you know, for them, they're not at the point that we are, that they would be having a webinar and having this conversation, or there's a huge amount of outward resistance to it. So I do want to acknowledge that in some ways the UK is making some progress, and at least the openness to have the conversation is a really positive thing. I think over the last 800 years, there have been national and international milestones that have shaped the concept of human rights in Britain. Sadly, none of them have eliminated racism, from the Magna Carta in 1215, which acknowledged for the first time that subjects of the crown had legal rights, and that laws could apply to kings and queens too, to the Race Relations Act of 1965, which many people are familiar with. That was the first legislation in the UK to address racial discrimination. It's been criticised because what the problem with it is that what it does is it gives a blanket law for everyone. And as I said, when we do the same for everyone, the people who are most advantaged already are able to take more advantage of the law than those who are at a disadvantage. And so, you know, what that means is that many people adhere to the most, what they have to do, and they don't go beyond what is the minimum expectation of them. But what I'd say is, if we just think about the UK and we think about the organisations in the UK and we think about the people in the UK, when I looked at the research for the book, the global majority, or you might call people ethnic minority in your organisation, they made up at the time about 14.4% of the UK population. If we just look at England, it's 16%, but then when we even it out for other parts of the UK, it decreases it a little bit. So, you know, that's about 14% of the UK are from the global majority. Look around your organisations, everyone who's here, and think, okay, if I look around, do I think about, you know, 14% of my population is from the global majority at every level? I think what you might find is in the least senior levels, yeah, maybe so, and it might even be higher than 14%. But as you go up the ranks, what you find is that's not the case. The unemployment rate for Black people was 13%, compared to 4.5% of white people, according to government statistics in 2020. Overall, 28% of Black households are on persistent low incomes versus 12% of white households. Nearly 27% of Black people live in overcrowded accommodation, compared to 8.3% of white people. only 20% of Black African and 40% of Black Caribbean households own their homes, compared to 68% of white British people. And Black graduates, you know, bearing in mind, Emerald, you do a lot of academic publishing, so we might have some academics here. Black graduates earn about 23% less on average than white graduates, and they're much more likely to be unemployed. So those stats tell you the state of what we're experiencing. And I think this is very important to look at the stats, because you can look around, maybe you can look at me and say, well, you know, aren't Black people doing just fine? And absolutely, some people are doing okay, but it is a minority of the minority that are doing okay. And what I think is great about that in some ways is that if you are a leader who goes out of your way to create equity in your organization, and you make a difference for people who are Black or from minoritized backgrounds, then actually you're probably changing, generationally changing the lives of people. It's not just one person's life you're changing generations to come. And I think that's a wonderful, powerful, amazing position you can be in to actually really challenge the status quo. Yeah, I'll pause for a moment. I know I've been talking for a while.
Thank you, Jenny. I mean, it's you know, as you give those figures and those stats, it's quite shocking, really. You know, because you think it was really positive, okay, that the UK, you know, is ahead of some countries on this, and you know, is taking steps, but actually, at the moment, the you know, the stark reality is that there's a really long way to go, and that is, you know, it is an opportunity. And I think the way you sort of phrased that and sort of positioned it, it's really helpful, actually, because we can do something. That's why we're here, because actually it's not about just sort of mourning over the issues, it's about taking that action, isn't it, which is what we all want to get to. But I think it is quite useful to understand some of the issues. So I mean, obviously yourself as a Black British woman, and obviously your leadership development work, you know very well the struggles faced by those executives from the global majority. So it would be really useful to understand some of the issues that they deal with on a regular basis, so we can sort of recognise it, and actually then maybe that will give us some help into where we need to focus our efforts. And welcome Danielle too. She's able to join us. That's fantastic.
Sorry,
you managed to join us and get on, and everything's working, so that's really fab.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great.
We're seconds away from being frisbeed out the window of our new offices.
Technology is always a beast, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yes, yeah, we were just talking about sort of what are some of the issues that that global majority face, you know, in the workplace. So I think Jenny, with all her experiences, and obviously you're working with people, you know, that are struggling right now. So what do you see as sort of the common ones?
Yeah, I'm going to just start with the story of my own experience, actually. So a few years ago, I used to be part of a program that had we used to have 300 people in a room at a time, and we used to deliver a program all day. And I asked a speaker to come along for an hour of the day just to talk about her experience. This speaker was a black mixed heritage woman, but we didn't really look alike. You know, you couldn't really mistake us in a lineup. I think you'd know we had quite different features, different height, different coloured hair. In fact, you know, many different things about us. But whenever I invited her, people would get us confused every time. They'd call her Jenny, they'd call me by her name, and you know, things like that are microaggressions, because it makes you start to question yourself. Do I look like this person? Why can't they tell two people from a similar heritage apart? And those sort of things, if in the work environment, can really make you question yourself. So I was doing some work with the NHS recently, and someone said, yes, people keep mistaking me from the other person with a similar background. Really no similarity, very different names as well. And now when people are talking to me and asking me about bits of work or giving me bits of work, I'm questioning now whether they mean me or they mean the other person. And it really makes me start to doubt myself. So it's things like that. If people can't tell two people apart, to speak quite crudely, if you think the majority of the population in the workplace would be white colleagues, and we can all tell our white colleagues apart, and there's a minority of people from a Black or ethnic minority backgrounds, global majority backgrounds, why can't we tell those people apart? It feels lazy. It feels that it's not worth me recognizing the difference between two people. And that absolutely is a microaggression. Now, you might say, well, these things happen. People call me by the wrong name. But if every day, day in and day out, you've been working somewhere for many years and people still can't tell you apart, it becomes an aggression, because you should know by now. And I'm going to share another story from someone who was someone who had South Asian heritage. A manager came into a workplace, and this is a positive act. So I'm against a microaggression, I guess. Someone went into an organization as a new leader. They looked at the names of their staff and they saw, oh, this person is called Mahesh, but I've noticed everyone calls them Mo. She said, I would have thought Mo was short for Mohammed. This doesn't make sense to me. So she spoke to him. He'd worked at the organization for 30 years and said, you want to be called Mo, do you? Because I see your name's Mahesh, and I would have thought we would have shortened it for something else. And they said, no, I joined 30 years ago. People said they couldn't pronounce Mahesh, so they called me Mo. And that's what they'd called me for the last 30 years. So she said, is that what you want to be called? And he said, absolutely not. I want to be called Mahesh. That's my name. It has meaning. My family gave me that name, and that is who I am. And she said, okay, let's have an all hands meeting. Let's tell your story, and let's make sure people call you Mahesh from now on. And now people do occasionally call him the wrong name, but then they apologize. These things might seem small, but imagine you didn't choose to have that nickname at work or that shortened name, and for 30 years you had to be put up with someone calling you the wrong name because it suited them, because they wanted to anglicize it or make it easier to say. The truth is, we can all say Tchaikovsky, can't we? We can even recognize the spelling of it when we see it. And so there should be no one's name that we can't say. Now, these are microaggressions, these small cuts that you get on a daily basis. I don't know if you've ever had a paper cut, but if you have, they're quite painful. They're only tiny though, aren't they? But if you had one paper cut after another, it can be a very painful experience. And they are small things, but they start to make you doubt yourself. They start to make you question if you should be there. Someone else described to me recently the fact that they have a strong African accent, but they speak really clearly and they speak excellent English, but they have an accent. They said that in meetings, when they speak, people squint. So some people they make that facial expression, and it just makes them question themselves. Is something I'm saying wrong? What is it I'm doing that is not okay? Yes, they have an accent that isn't English, isn't an English accent, but they speak English better than a lot of English people do, in my opinion. And those sorts of things, that the double takes, the sort of double checking someone should be in the room because they're in a minority. Is this the right meeting for you? Are you at the grade that should be in the meeting? Questioning people's qualifications. What is your experience to be here? Where did you become educated? The squinting, the questioning, the mistaking, all of these microaggressions get to you over time. And what you do is you try to, as best as possible, fit in with the majority group so you don't have to experience those paper cuts. And what you do is you cover bits of your identity to fit in. You might change try your best to change the way you speak. You might try your best to change the way you dress. You might change your mannerisms. You might take up different hobbies so that you can have something to talk to your colleagues about. But while you do that, you take away your uniqueness. You take away the difference that you bring that could help your organization really value you. You know, the fact that you might be able to step between cultures seamlessly is a real positive. The fact that you might be bilingual is a real positive. The fact that actually you might be able to tap into a community that the majority group might not be able to in order to serve new audiences, in order not to be cancelled because you've done, you know, the organization's done something that people, you know, come out in uproar against. Those things you leave behind because you don't want to stand out. And that might mean straightening your hair if you have Afro hair, not wearing your veil if you'd normally be veiled, not asking for quiet time because you need to pray during the day, and it might even mean not mixing with colleagues from the same background as you for fear that you'll receive the same stereotypical view of them or the same bias that they experience. And it might even mean dressing differently. So, for example, the amount of times I've been to events and people, you know, will question whether I'm the catering staff or someone like that because I'm a Black person, which means that I think for a majority of my life I was like so overdressed for events, although I, you know, not that I don't like dressing up, but so overdressed so people wouldn't mistake me for a staff member in a room of people where I was in the majority, in the minority. So, you know, these sorts of things we feel we have to compensate for, and it leads to us experiencing imposter syndrome. That sense of, am I supposed to be here? Am I enough? Do I have to work much harder than everyone else to be considered equal, you know, maybe not even equal, but almost as good? You know, when we deliver programs, we deliver programs for thousands. We've delivered programs in thousands of people in organisations, usually at the point of where their glass ceiling is, helping people to get over that glass ceiling from underrepresented groups, and also supporting their managers to be inclusive and their senior leaders to sponsor them. You know, when we do that work, imposter syndrome comes up a lot. But it's fueled through the microaggressions, through the covering, and this sense that, can I really trust that if I show up authentically, that I will be safe in this environment to do so? And so what people do is they create a box around themselves in which they're safe, but they don't grow in those places. So the underestimation of their potential is fulfilled because they keep themselves safe. They don't take risks. They don't put themselves in a position where they could make a mistake because they feel that the consequences are too big as a result. And that's just a tiny snippet of the experience.
Thank you, Jenny. I mean, I just hearing real life experiences, you know, that these are actually people, you know, because sometimes it's hard to really visualize what people experience. We just don't know until you hear the story. So actually, you know, you could hear buzzwords essentially about equality, equity, all the rest of it. But when you explain it like that, I think that really brings it to life. And actually, you know, we don't want our colleagues feeling like that. That's awful, that they don't feel valued and they have to they can't be themselves and they have to fit in. And I mean, that's awful to have colleagues feeling like that. And you know, I would say most people wouldn't, or I think most people wouldn't want that. And I guess, yeah, just hearing those, it just is quite alarming actually, to think that people having to think every single thing that they're doing in life at work. I mean, it's just, you know, from what you know, the way you speak, I mean, that's horrible. That's really horrible. But what can we do? And I think that's the next part of what we want to discuss now. And we'll sort of talk a little bit of what's in your book. So you note in your book, Equality versus Equity, that the conversations, and we've spoken about this already, about diversity and inclusion, they've tripled in the last year. and that those diversity and inclusion roles are growing 1.65 times faster than HR roles. So, I mean, there appears to be a real drive for change. But white leaders, I mean, that's the thing. It's like you can empathise or whatever, you know, you can sort of feel bad about it, or, but you know, what do we say? What do we do? You know, as leaders. And what would you say are some of the potential pitfalls that white leaders fall into, and what strategies do they really need to move forward? Because whatever we've done till now has not been that effective, has it? We're missing something here, so we need help.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. I think there is a lot of fear of saying the wrong thing, of being called racist, of knowing what to say, and I think that holds many white leaders back. I think it's that sense of, as someone said to me, when I was growing up, I was told never to mention race or ethnicity. That's a white leader said to me, and now you're asking me to name it. And that feels very uncomfortable to me, because I'm almost having to rewire my brain to think in a very different way. The truth is, even if you weren't permitted to mention it previously, you still saw it. You still noticed if someone was from a different background to yourself. And the truth of the matter is that if we don't start to have conversations about race and ethnicity, what we're saying is, you know, we can't actually change anything. So if we say, oh, I'm colorblind, I don't see color, everybody is just the same to me. If I have a challenge that is because of my race and ethnicity, if, for example, recently I went to a Eastern European country with someone who was white, and I got the interrogation and they didn't. That's actually the first time it's happened to me. I haven't ever experienced that anywhere else. I was even asked to prove that I was leaving the country on the date I was going to leave the country. So if the person I was with did not want to entertain the fact that that was likely to be only because of my ethnicity, you know, that dismisses some of my experience. And so that fear that you have that might be holding you back from having the conversation, if you don't have it, what you're saying is that we can't talk about this here. And if we can't talk about this here, we can't do anything about it, because you need to have the conversation for it to happen. So I think fear is holding a lot of leaders back, fear of saying the wrong thing, and not knowing the right thing to say. I also think that because we haven't had conversations about race and ethnicity much, actually we're not fluent at it. You know, if you ask me to speak Mandarin, I'm not, and even if I used Duolingo for a month, I'm still not going to be very fluent. I've got to practice. And what is going to help us move out of that space of fear, instead of paralysis by analysis, is actually having conversations. So and developing your fluency and asking for feedback. And I think you can preface those conversations with, I'm coming at this with the best intentions. If I make a mistake, please let me know. You know, and I think that's an important thing to do. I was working with an organization, and when they spoke about disability, they talked to, their language was differently able. It's not the language that I usually use, but I went into another organization and I was talking about inclusive language, and I used differently able. And someone came to me afterwards who had a disability and said, I found that language offensive. You know, I don't understand why you just didn't say person with a disability, etc. And I said, oh, I'll tell you why I said it. I wholeheartedly apologize. I won't use that language, especially when you're in the room, you know, because I know that's offensive to you in the future. And I think it's about that willingness to say, hands up, I made a mistake here. I didn't mean to offend you. Please let me know what the right thing to say is, and I will do my best to say that in the future. So you have to move into that place of being a beginner. And often as leaders and managers, we're an expert. We know it all. That's why we got to where we are. But I love the saying by Suzuki, in the mind of the expert, there are few possibilities. In the mind of the beginner, there are many. And so we have to put ourselves, we have to step out of fearfulness. We have to move out of paralysis by analysis. We have to develop our racial fluency by actually trying. and we have to put ourselves in the place of a beginner and be open to admitting when we make a mistake, and have that growth mindset where we are able to learn and grow. So, you know, these are things that I think we need to do. And I think the other thing is we need to own if we have privilege. And I know a lot of people are uncomfortable with that, because absolutely lots of white people haven't had privileged lives. You know, you might have had a very difficult life and a very difficult upbringing. But when we're talking about racial privilege, we're saying you're not going to be discriminated against because of your race and ethnicity. And so in situations where other people can be, you can use your power with humility. And, you know, I am a heterosexual Black woman. I can be discriminated against because of my race and my ethnicity. I'm not going to be discriminated against because of my sexual orientation. And so in spaces where other people might be, I can use my power with humility. So it's about recognizing your privilege in a positive way. It's not a terrible thing to have privilege. It's how you use it, you know, to be able to help and support other people positively.
That's really helpful. And I think I really liked what you said about the humility, because, you know, I think, you know, we all know that the greatest leaders are the most humble leaders, really, the ones that have humility. They don't know it all, and actually the only way you will move up in life is the more you know, the more you realize you just actually don't know. And to always have that sort of sense of needing to learn and needing to improve, I think is a really great way to sort of approach this subject and tackle, you know, make a difference. And I know we've still got quite a lot to cover, but it would be quite useful if you could start talking about maybe some of the policies and the practices at an organisational level, because I think, like, you know, in Emerald, and Danielle, you might be able to talk about this as well. We've, like lots of companies, we're starting to roll things out and take action to make a difference. But what would you say would sort of like the main areas that companies can really sort of move in that would affect change quite quickly? I mean, where do people start really in an organisation?
I'm wondering if Danielle wants to start, just based on the fact that everyone's heard a lot of my voice and not much of Danielle's, and then I'll add to it. Should we do that?
Thank you.
Giving you a little bit of a rest. I think one of the things that we've really started to level up with recently isn't actually a policy. It's about finding people from the global majority that we trust to give business. There's many networks out there. Jenny runs an extremely successful network that we've commissioned work with before, people on that network. Because, like you say, you've got to have the humility to know what you don't know, and one business can't be an expert in everything. So bringing people from the global majority in who are experts to supplement your diversity and inclusion program is a really good one. Off the top of my head, we've recently done business with people like Rena Arnand, who's a fantastic neurodiversity consultant. We've had Shahida Rahman come in, who is a storyteller, a fiction writer, and she gave us such a beautiful and compelling account of South Asian history in the UK from the perspective of her own family, and then all the way through suffragettes, Lascars and Ayers, and it was fascinating. And we've had people like Yasmin Sheikh and Claudia Crowley as well to do anti-racism work with, and Jenny as well has done podcasts with us and things like that. So I think, as well as taking accountability for your own path and your own learning and practicing getting things wrong and practicing leaning into it, it's really important to back other people as well, and to put our money where our mouth is as businesses, because, like we've said before, people aren't given the opportunities, the same level of opportunity, and we as businesses, if we all come together and take responsibility for giving people opportunities, then that can only be a good thing. And you never know where it might lead the organisation as well. We've had some great work done. So that's my piece on.
Brilliant. I think afterwards you might be sharing something I created on supplier diversity, yes, which was some further organisations that you can touch on as well to lean into this. I think the key for me is Number one, you need to appreciate the difference in your organization. How can you appreciate difference? I think that's something to really consider. How do you appreciate when people have different backgrounds, different ethnicity, etc., and bring them into the mix and value what they bring. The other thing I would say is you need to recruit differently, very likely. Think about your panels, think about your taking names off and educational places off your CVs, having diverse panels as well, and making sure the diverse panel has equal say, because you might have a diverse panel, but if it comes down to one person anyway, it's a little bit pointless. I would say look at your talent differently as well. Sometimes I find in companies, if your English is your first language, not your second language, you're immediately at a disadvantage. There could be so many different things or experiences. Maybe you had debating in school and this person doesn't, or you might say this person, I don't think they have leadership potential, because culturally they're a bit more deferential to authority. So look for culture add, not culture fit, is really important. And I would say really check whether you are underestimating your colleagues' potential. Put them in positions to really show up and really get that opportunity to show you what they're capable of, but make sure that they're safe to be able to do it. Because it's not just about saying, go for it, go onto that tightrope, you'll be fine, I believe in you. It's about saying, if it goes wrong, actually, I'm going to give you a second chance, like I would someone else who's in the majority group. I'm not just going to put you in a risky position. And so it's really important to create that safety net. And I would say, generally look at your policies. The great thing that universities are doing are that, they're looking at the curriculum. Where do we get our wisdom from? Yeah, have we been getting our wisdom from one part of the world? What about the wisdom in the other side of the world? Notice where does the wisdom that comes into your organization come from? Are you privileging certain wisdom over others? And how do the policies that we have disadvantage certain groups of people because of their background, and what can we do differently? If I just think about the field of coaching, for example, it's a very expensive profession to get into. The courses are very expensive, and that's why we haven't had a diversity of coaches. If you want to have more diverse coaches, then you might need to create some scholarships to get people into this field. So think about what it is it that we need to do. It's not enough to say, oh, they're just not there. Maybe we need to grow our own, and maybe we need to reach out to different networks to find people instead of asking our friends who maybe are similar to us. So those are just a few things that you can do, but definitely appreciate difference, recruit differently, promote differently. And I think if you can have that mantra in your mind, that's a great starting point. And get to know your colleagues from all backgrounds.
That's so helpful. I mean, I think those are something that we can just literally take now and run with, and it might not take that much investment in some. I mean, obviously the recruitment part could do, but some of these things could be quick wins. Like we could easily do that. I mean, about the wisdom part, why not introduce that, something that could be introduced like really quickly without much cost, or anything like investment. But it would bring so much value and understanding to the rest of the organisation. And I can see that we are sort of running out of time, so it probably just going on to the last couple of questions. And I think one of them is around, the idea of, how to engage, if you're, leaders, how do they engage the rest of the staff members to come on board with all these changes and policies and different mindsets? And I think crucially, should that engagement be compulsory? Like, how do we get them involved? Does it have to be compulsory? Is that the right way to go about it? And then I would say the last question really is just around when maybe there's some leaders, there aren't, maybe some people here aren't leaders, but they can still make a difference. So what is it that they can do? Like, how can we all be part of the solution? How can we all make a difference? So yeah, I just wonder if you can sort of speak to those two things. That'd be fab.
think a basic level of development should be mandatory, just like any health and safety, knowledge is mandatory. So I do think there should be some understanding that the language we use here, what we mean by these terms, what is not, what is against dignity at work or racism, etc. I think that should be mandatory. I think that the challenge with programs, when you leave them open, is that the people who come are already the converted. They're the people who get it already and they just want to do more. However, this work is about hearts and minds. And if you just make people attend a course, go through the motions, and they're not really invested, it's sort of a waste of an investment. So I always think in organisations, it's about working with those who get it and helping them be champions and influence others, be champions and allies for others. But I do definitely think there should be some basic mandatory development for everyone, and then really using the people who get it to influence those around them, and share their stories and influence in ways that make sense for the organisation.
Thank you.
And you asked me another question.
What can we do? I mean, we might not be leaders, maybe some of us aren't leaders, but we still want to make a difference. We still want to be involved. Like, what is it that we can do ourselves?
Yeah, I think, do act on offhand comments. I'll give you an example. Someone was in a room. Someone was quite offensive to them, a black person, and no one else spoke up. They walked out of the room and people came to them, oh, that was terrible, are you okay? So they cared, they did care, they saw it, but they only asked the person outside of the room. I think that if you are in a position to be able to act or speak up on comments that are offensive in the moment, and instead of leaving it on the shoulders of the person who is experiencing it, that's an amazing act of allyship. I know it's not always possible, but it's much more helpful if someone who, a white colleague speaks up on behalf of someone who is black when they hear something that's not okay. Even if you do it in a curious way, oh, tell me a bit more why you said that. Oh, can you explain where you were going with that comment? Or can you describe what you meant? So you could come at it in a curious way, but at least you are tackling it in the moment instead of leaving it on that person's shoulders to tackle it, because they end up being the person who sounds like they've got a chip on their shoulder. I think other things you can do is point out when there's no diversity in the room. Are we missing some perspectives, do you think, in this room? How do we get them in the room? So I think that's something that you can say. I think there's no excuse now not for educating ourselves. There are Netflix films, there are podcasts, there are articles, there are books. Educate yourself in the areas where you need a little bit of work and you need to have a bit of understanding. So, those are a few things that you can do. And I think just checking in on people, one of the things that people don't always realize is, so you might say to yourself, you're a good person. And I assume everyone who's on this webinar and everyone who watches the recording is a good person. But there was a saying by Desmond Tutu, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. And so it's not enough to be a good person. It's really important to take action. Your action might be reading, your action might be speaking up, your action might be just making sure that a colleague knows that you're there for them, or your action could be bigger than that, in that you have more power to make changes in the organisation. But you have to do something, because if you're neutral and you do nothing, as Desmond Tutu said, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. So it's not enough to do nothing.
Fantastic. Oh, this has been such an amazing webinar. I mean, just talking to you, you're so easy to talk to, and I love that you just put it in sort of, it's just plain terms so that you can really understand. And we've just been given so many practical solutions, or ways of taking action and making a difference. And thank you so much. It's been absolutely incredible. I could just carry on talking to you for like another hour or two just about on this subject. And I just wanted to say, sorry.
I want to say thank you first. I can hear you. I think you were going to say thank you. I just say thank you to Emerald, actually. It was really wonderful to be spotted and encouraged to write my book, for you to give me the book deal. I really appreciate it. I've had great feedback on the book. Even just this morning, someone told me they've recommended it in a university because they found it so helpful. So I want to thank you, and also for holding this webinar as well. So I know I'm not sure on every author's experience, but this has been really an honour. So thank you.
Oh, it's been our pleasure and honour to have you with us, and it's been so wonderful working with you. And you know, I think just having your time and your insights and giving that to us is so incredible. And you know, thank you very, very much. And I hope that we can do something like this again in the future. And actually, we will be having a podcast on similar subject quite soon, so that will be great. So that's another one to look out for. And I also wanted to say that if you want to find out a bit more about this topic, obviously Jenny's mentioned her book as well, which is Equality versus Equity. It is available on Amazon, so you can check it out there. And also definitely recommend going on to Jenny's website, so that's jennygarrett.global. And there's blogs, there's upcoming events, and there's a brilliant newsletter which I've started to subscribe to as well. And it's great, just getting that, you know, just a reminder as well. And it's like so many good resources on there that really sort of make you think in a different way. And it's so accessible. I think that's what I've really enjoyed. We have obviously run out of time to answer any questions, but we will get back to anyone that's posted any questions. So I want to thank Jenny again for this wonderful session. Also want to thank everyone that's attended today for your time, and you know, thank you for listening. And you will receive an email within, I think, in the next 24 hours with the recording. Please share it with your networks and your colleagues, and sort of make a difference, get the word out there. And if you know, have anything you want to follow up with us, or you know, or obviously with Jenny as well, then please get in touch. So just want to say thank you, and yeah, hope to see you again soon, and hope to see Jenny, and thank you Danielle, and thank all of you. So yeah, have a good rest of your day. Thank you, and take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you, Jenny. Lovely to see you.
Okay, bye then.
Bye.
Bye.